Hi viewers, you are listening the Alpha King's Untold Stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race and you will enjoy it a lot. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1: The Wagon of Goodbyes. The air this morning had teeth. It bit through my thin cloak with every breath, a sharp, pine-scented cold that promised snow. I pressed my forehead against the rough wooden slats of a wagon, watching the forest blur into a smear of gray and green. My fingers, curled around the fair-bared blanket they'd given us, were already numb. It was more a gesture than a comfort. On the opposite bench, the other girls huddled together, their whispered conversations weaving a wall of sound I wasn't invited to breach. I was used to that. Warmth from strangers was a currency I'd never possessed. The recruitment officer's words had painted such a pretty picture. Serve in the royal household for 3 years, send wages home, return with a skill and a reference. For girls like me, orphaned, poor, with hair the color of faded wheat and eyes that had learned to watch too much, it was the only door that hadn't already slammed shut. My aunt signed the papers with a relief she didn't bother to hide, her tight smile saying what her words wouldn't. One less mouth to feed. I understood. I'd been understanding my whole life. "Do you think it's true what they say about him?" The voice, bright and curious, cut through my thoughts. It was Leora. I'd learned her name at yesterday's stop. She had dark, bouncing curls and an easy beauty that drew people like a flame draws moths, the kind of beauty I'd stopped wishing for years ago. "That he's never taken a mate?" Another girl whispered, her eyes wide. "My cousin works in the laundry. She says he walks the western halls at night like a ghost, and everyone pretends not to see." "I heard he executed his own cousin for treason," a third voice added, hushed and thrilling. "That's not true. The Lord Consort died in a border skirmish. Everyone knows that." I listened without a sound, making myself smaller in my corner. I'd learned that participation invited questions, and questions led to stories I preferred to keep buried. The wagon jolted violently over a deep rut, and I bit my lip against a sudden surge of nausea. I'd barely eaten the meager breakfast provided. The hard bread had found its way to a young mother at the last inn, her infant's cries speaking of a hummer I remembered in my bones. A stupid choice, perhaps. Soft, my aunt would have sneered, but I'd seen my own reflection in that woman's exhausted eyes. Sometimes the only thing that kept you tethered to this world was a moment of kindness, however small. The forest grew denser, ancient trees crowding the roadside like silent, judging sentinels. Shadows lengthened despite the early hour, swallowing what little warmth the weak sun offered. I pulled the worthless blanket tighter. The driver, a grizzled man who'd spoken maybe 3 words the entire journey, was tense. I saw it in the hard line of his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting toward the tree line, dark and impenetrable. "How much longer?" Leora called forward, her voice too loud in the quiet. "Border checkpoint in a few hours," he grunted back, not turning. "Then half a day to the White Citadel." The Citadel. I tried to imagine it. Towers of pale stone piercing the sky, halls buzzing with people who knew their place, who belonged. I would be a ghost there, I thought, a silent, forgettable shadow among hundreds, and maybe that was for the best, safer. I'd survived this long by being the girl no one remembered. The attack didn't come with a roar, it came with a silence. One moment, the only sounds were the creak of wheels, the clop of hooves, the rustle of the girls' dresses. The next, the world itself seemed to shatter. A sound unlike anything I'd ever heard, a crack of thunder from a clear sky, mixed with the splintering of 1,000 trees, exploded around us. The wagon lurched as if a giant hand had swatted it. The driver's shout was cut short. Then we were flying. Time broke into jagged pieces, screams, high and desperate, the awful groan of wood giving way, the sensation of weightlessness, then a crushing impact. My head struck something hard, and bright white pain bloomed behind my eyes. I was thrown clear, my body hitting the frozen ground with a force that stole the very air from my lungs. A terrible ringing silence fell. I lay there, broken, struggling to remember how to breathe. Each attempt was a knife in my side. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. Slowly, fighting the darkness at the edges of my vision, I opened my eyes. The wagon lay on its side like a dead beast, one wheel spinning a lazy, pointless circle. A thin plume of smoke rose from somewhere nearby, carrying a bitter chemical stench. Figures moved in the trees, not men. They were too large, their shapes wrong, flowing through the shadows with a predator's grace. Their eyes glinted like chips of amber in the gloom. Fear, cold and clean, cut through the pain. It gave me a strength I didn't own. I dragged myself, an inch at a time, toward a massive fallen log. My fingers scrabbled at frozen leaves and broken branches, leaving smears of red behind. Every movement was a fresh fire, but I'd learned long ago that pain was temporary, death was not. I wedged myself into the narrow, dank space beneath the log, pulling rotted leaves and broken branches over my shivering form. Become stone, become shadow, become nothing. The old lessons, learned on streets colder than this, flooded back. I'd hidden from dangers in human form before. Now I hid from monsters. The footsteps approached, heavy, deliberate. The earth trembled slightly with each step. A low, rumbling growl vibrated through the ground beneath my cheek, a sound that spoke to something primal and terrified deep in my spine. I closed my eyes, willed my heart to be silent, my breath to vanish. It stopped right by my hiding place. I could smell it, wet fur, earth, and something else, something wild and ancient that made my skin crawl. A massive paw, claws longer than my fingers, landed inches from my face, scoring deep grooves in the frozen soil. I didn't breathe. I didn't exist. An eternity passed in that second. Then, from a distance, a howl tore through the air, not a cry of pain, but a summons, clear and commanding. The creature near me answered, a shorter, deeper sound. The paw lifted. The footsteps retreated, crashing away through the brush. I didn't move. I counted to 100, then 200. Only then did I let out a shuddering, silent gasp, the air burning my lungs. The forest returned to its eerie, watchful quiet. I stayed there as the light bled from gray to charcoal, stayed until the cold was a part of me, until my injured leg was a numb, distant log. Stayed long enough to understand a terrible truth. No one was coming back for survivors, because there were no survivors, except me. Always me. The thought was a bitter poison in my mouth, too stubborn to die, too frightened to ever really live. When I finally crawled out, my muscles were locked, my body screaming in protest. The wagon was a skeleton of splintered wood and torn canvas. Supplies were scattered like bones. Limping, using a broken branch as a crutch, I forced myself to look inside. Empty. No bodies, just dark stains on the floorboards and deep, terrible scratches in the wood that told a story I couldn't bear to read. I found a dented canteen half buried in dirt, and a small leather pack that had survived, holding some dried meat, a hard wedge of cheese, and a flint striker. Practical things. Survivors' things. I shouldered the pack, my hands shaking so badly I could barely tie the straps. The road stretched in two directions, both equally unknown. Behind me lay the life that had no use for me. Ahead lay the Citadel I'd never reach, the future that had been stolen. But ahead also lay possibility. Someone would notice the wagon was missing, wouldn't they? The new maids would be expected. The thought felt fragile, foolish. Girls like me disappeared all the time. The world simply turned the page. I turned my face away from the past. My crutch bit into the earth, and I began to walk. Because going back had never been an option. Survive, endure, hope for nothing, and be quietly surprised by anything. That was the only arithmetic I knew. The sun died behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of bruised purple and dull gold. My legs trembled with every step. My ribs were a cage of fire, but I moved forward, into the deepening dark, because that was the only direction left. Chapter 2. The King in the Moonlight. The forest at night was a living darkness. It pressed in from all sides, a solid wall of black that swallowed the narrow path. The stars were pinpricks of ice far above, offering no light, only a reminder of how small and alone I was. My vision swam, blurring with exhaustion and pain. I might have been crying. It was hard to tell the difference between tears and the cold's bite on my skin. One foot, then the other. The crutch thudded dully on the hard, packed earth. Breathe in, breathe out. The simple, brutal mathematics of staying alive. My mind began to drift, detached from the agony of my body. Memories flickered, my mother's voice, a faint melody, the smell of bread from a bakery I could never enter, the hollow feeling in my aunt's eyes when she looked at me. I didn't hear them approach. One moment there was only the sound of my own ragged breath and the crunch of my footsteps. The next, the world erupted in noise and light. Hoofbeats, sudden and thunderous, coming from behind me. A shout, sharp with command. Halt! I turned, too fast. My injured leg buckled and the world tilted. I collapsed onto the cold road, the pack spilling from my shoulders. Through a haze of dizziness, I saw horses, enormous, powerful beasts that gleamed like iron in the sudden torchlight, and riders. 5 of them, clad in armor that seemed to drink the light, making them shapes of pure shadow. One dismounted. He moved with a liquid, predatory grace that spoke of power held in careful check. He strode towards me, and even through the fog of pain, I felt it. A pressure in the air, a charge like the moment before a storm breaks. It was a presence that made the very night feel still and watchful. He crouched before me, and the torchlight finally found his face. It was a face carved from the night itself, strong, sharp angles, a blade of a nose, a jaw set in stone. His hair was the color of raven wings, falling across a broad forehead, but it was his eyes that stopped my breath. They caught the torchlight and held it, glowing with an unearthly silver-gold hue. They were the eyes of the creature from the forest, yet held in a man's face, filled with a fierce, intelligent light. "The supply wagon?" he said, his voice low, gravelly, as if unused to speech. It wasn't a question. I could only manage a weak nod, my throat sealed shut by fear and thirst. "You survived." Again, that strange, rough voice, but there was a note in it now, something that cut through the gravel. Not surprise exactly, something deeper, a kind of recognition. He studied me, his gaze a physical weight as it traveled over my torn dress, my bloodied hands, the awkward angle of my leg. It was a clinical assessment, swift and thorough. When his eyes returned to mine, something in them shifted, hardened, then softened, all in a heartbeat. "Can you stand?" I tried. My pride flared, a last dying ember. I pushed myself up, my arms trembling violently. For a second, I thought I had it. Then my leg gave way again, and I crumpled with a gasp of shame. He didn't speak. He rose to his full height, towering over me, and called to one of his men. "A cloak and water, now." He turned back to me. "Your name."
I hesitated. Names had weight. Names made you real, made you a person who could be remembered or hunted. But this man with his wolf's eyes had found me in the endless dark. He already saw me. Kaelen, I whispered, giving the name I'd chosen for myself long ago, the one that belonged only to me. Something flickered in those extraordinary eyes, a confirmation. He gave a single, slow nod. Kaelen, he repeated, and the way he said it, it wasn't just a name, it was a question, an answer, a secret all at once. The syllables were gentle on his rough voice, as if he were handling something fragile and precious. It made my chest ache with a feeling I couldn't name. "I will take you to safety," he stated, no room for argument in his tone.
He reached for me and I flinched. A full-body recoil, instinctive and immediate, born from a lifetime of learned caution. His hand froze in midair, suspended between us. I saw the understanding dawn in his eyes. He'd seen that reaction before. He knew what it meant. "I will not harm you," he said, the words quiet but absolute. "You have my vow." Vows were just words. I knew that better than anyone. Yet, looking into his face, into those eyes that held both a beast's intensity and a startling humanity, I found myself believing him. Or maybe I was just too broken to fight. I gave another small nod. He bent and lifted me as if I weighed no more than the cloak his man now draped over me. His arms were solid, unyielding, yet his hold was carefully measured, avoiding my injuries. The warmth of him against the pervasive cold was almost painful, a shock to my frozen system. I could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of his heartbeat against my side, a stark contrast to the frantic flutter of my own. As he carried me toward the waiting horses, I found my voice, a thin, cracked thing. "The others?" His jaw tightened, the muscle leaping beneath his skin. He didn't look at me. "We found the wreckage. We are tracking the perpetrators." "Are they alive?" I pressed, though I already knew. He didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. A wave of guilt, cold and sickening, washed over me. I'd lived because I'd hidden, because I'd been small and silent and forgettable, because when the terror came, my first and only thought had been to save myself. "It is not a failing," he said abruptly, his voice a low rumble near my ear. He had read my silence perfectly. "To survive is never a crime. It is the first and most sacred duty of all living things." His words were a balm I didn't deserve. He mounted his massive horse in one fluid motion, settling me before him, cradled against his chest. I was too weary, too hurt to protest the intimacy of it. "To the Citadel," he commanded his men. "Send a falcon ahead, have the healers waiting." The Citadel. So I was going there after all, not as a new maid, but as a broken thing rescued from the dark. The irony was a bitter taste. As we rode, the world became a lurching, shadowy dream. The forest sped by, the torchlight casting dancing monsters on the trees. The pain in my body began to recede, pushed back by a creeping numbness. Consciousness was a fraying thread. The last thing I knew was the solid certainty of his arms around me, a fortress against the night, and a strange, unbidden thought, quieter than a whisper. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was not alone. Chapter 3: Whispers in the White Citadel. I woke to whiteness. Not the harsh white of snow, but a soft, filtered glow. Sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains, illuminating pale stone walls and linens that smelled faintly of lavender and something clean like mountain herbs. For a blissful, empty moment, I remembered nothing. There was no pain, no fear, only this gentle, white peace.
Then memory returned, not with a flood, but a cold, trickling dread. The wagon, the screams, the claws in the dirt, the man with wolf's eyes. I tried to sit up. A sharp, professional hand pressed firmly on my shoulder, easing me back down. "None of that, my dear." The voice was feminine, crisp, and brooked no argument. "You've got 2 cracked ribs, a sprained ankle that wishes it was merely sprained, and more bruises than a fallen apple. Swift movement is not on your agenda today." She turned my head. The woman was older, her hair a sleek cap of steel gray pulled into a severe but practical knot. Her face was a map of lines that spoke of both laughter and sternness. She wore simple robes of deep blue, and her hands moved with a serene efficiency as she checked the bandages wrapped securely around my torso. "Where?" I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. "The Royal Infirmary of the White Citadel," she supplied, reaching for a clay cup. She helped me drink, the cool water a miracle on my parched throat. "You've been asleep for nearly 2 days. I am Maris, head healer, and you, it seems, are the young woman the entire Citadel has been whispering about for 2 days." 2 days. I processed this slowly. Everyone? Maris's expression became carefully neutral, a mask of professionalism. The wagon was expected. When it did not arrive, search parties were dispatched. His Majesty himself led the one that scoured the North Road. She paused, her keen eyes studying me. "He's the one who carried you in. Hasn't visited since. The business with the border attacks consumes him, but his instructions regarding your care were exceedingly specific." His Majesty. The words landed in the quiet room with the weight of falling stones. The man who had found me, who had held me with such unsettling gentleness, who had looked at me as if I was a puzzle he needed to solve, that was the king, the Alpha King of the Terran Dominion, the subject of the girl's fearful whispers in the wagon. A hot wave of absurd embarrassment washed over me. I'd bled on a king. I'd flinched from a king's touch. "The others?" I asked, though the heaviness in Maris's eyes told me the answer before she spoke. "Lost," she said quietly. "The creatures that attacked were rogues, lichens without a pack, without law. They have been a thorn in our side for months, growing bolder. This was their most brazen strike yet." She smoothed my blanket with a touch that was surprisingly gentle. "You were the one to walk away." The guilt returned, a physical weight on my chest, heavier than the blankets. I'd hidden, I'd made myself nothing, and I'd lived while Leora, with her bright laughter, and Anya, with her wide eyes, had been taken into the darkness. "Stop that," Maris said sharply, and I startled. "I can see it on your face. The survivor's curse. You did what you were meant to do, what you had to do. There is no honor in dying when life is an option, girl." But there was shame. There always had been for me. Living when my parents had not. Living when other children in the orphanage had succumbed to fever and neglect. Living now when those girls had vanished. I turned my face toward the window, unable to bear her scrutiny. Beyond the curtains, I could see a sliver of a courtyard garden, its trees bare skeletal fingers against a pale winter sky. It was a bleak, honest beauty. "You'll rest here another week at least," Maris said, continuing in her practical cadence. "After that, we'll see about getting you vertical. The steward of the household will wish to speak with you about your intended position, assuming you still wish to serve." Did I? I had come here because the road behind me had collapsed.
But now, after surviving a massacre, after being carried to safety by a king, the thought of putting on a maid's uniform and fading into the stonework felt like a betrayal. Of what? I didn't know. "I don't know," I admitted. Maris nodded, as if this was the only sensible answer. "Well, you have time to decide.
For now, your only task is to heal." She stood, gathering her supplies. "I'll have some broth sent up. You need to rebuild your strength. And Kaelen?" She paused at the door, looking back. "You are safe here. Whatever shadows you outran to reach that wagon, they cannot cross this threshold." I wanted to believe her, but safety was a mirage I'd chased my whole life. It shimmered in the distance, only to vanish when you got too close. The days that followed blurred into a routine of quiet agony and gradual improvement. Maris visited twice daily, her manner brisk but not unkind. A young kitchen girl named Tessa brought meals, simple, nourishing broths and soft bread. She was round-faced and cheerful, her eyes wide with awe when she looked at me. "They're saying you're blessed by the moon herself," she confided one morning, arranging a tray on my lap, "that she hid you with her own light, 'cause you're meant for something grand." "That's nonsense," I said, but the words felt weak. "Is it?" Tessa chirped. "You lived when no one else did. The king himself brought you in, gave orders. Cook says that never happens." I learned the rhythms of the Citadel through sound. Bells marking the hours with solemn tones, the distant tramp of guards changing shifts, the low murmur of voices from the corridors, conversations that never quite reached my ears, and sometimes, late at night, when the world was still, a sound would drift through the high windows, a long, mournful howl that seemed to come from the mountains themselves. It made the hair on my arms stand on end, not just with fear, but with a strange, deep resonance, as if the sound vibrated in my very bones. On the fourth day, Maris allowed me to stand with help. Hobbling to the window, I finally saw the white citadel in truth. It was a city of stone carved into the mountain's very heart. Towers, slender and defiant, pierced the low clouds. Walls, sheer and impossibly high, embraced cascading levels of buildings, bridges, and gardens. It was not just a palace, it was a fortress, a living entity of order and power. And everywhere there were people, hundreds, thousands of them moving along the ramparts and courtyards, like blood cells in a vast stony body, all of them with a place, a purpose. I pressed my palm to the cold glass, the familiar hollow ache of being an outsider, a spectator, opening inside me. "You should be resting." The voice, deep and familiar, came from behind me. I spun, my injured ankle shrieking in protest. The world tilted. He was across the room in a breath, his hand shooting out to steady my arm before I could fall. The king, here, in the soft light of the infirmary. Up close, in the daylight, he was even more. Taller, broader. He wore simple dark clothing, a tunic and trousers of fine wool, but it did nothing to diminish the sheer aura of authority he carried. His face was all controlled intensity, a landscape of hard planes and angles, but his eyes, they were the same, silver gold, now warmed by the sun, fixed on me with an unsettling focus that made me want to both flee and lean closer. "Your Majesty," I managed, attempting a curtsy that nearly sent me to the floor again. His grip tightened on my arm. "Titles are not required. Sit, before you undo all of Maris's hard work." It was an order, delivered with a finality that left no room for debate. He guided me to a chair by the window with a carefulness that contradicted his commanding presence. I sat, painfully aware of my state, pale, thin, dressed in a borrowed infirmary shift, my hair a plain braid over one shoulder. He remained standing, forcing me to look up at him. "How do you fare?" I asked. "Well enough, sire. The healers are very thorough. Maris is formidable." A ghost of something, not a smile, but a slight easing touched his mouth. "She is the best." He moved to the window himself, looking out at his domain with an expression I couldn't decipher. "I wished to see you sooner. Circumstances—" He let the sentence fade, and I saw the weariness etched around his eyes, the tension in the set of his shoulders, the weight of a kingdom. "Did you find them?" I asked quietly. "The ones who attacked?" His jaw tightened. "Some. Others fled deeper into the wild territories. The hunt continues." He turned back to me, and there was a ferocity in his gaze now, a cold, promised violence. They will answer for what they did. This I swear. I believed him. There was a granite certainty in his voice. I'm sorry, the words spilled out, soft and wretched, about the others, that I couldn't, that I didn't. You survived, he interrupted, his voice rough, against odds that should have been impossible. Do you understand the significance of that? I shook my head, mute. He crossed the space between us and crouched, bringing us to eye level. This close, I could see the flecks of amber in the silver of his eyes. I could smell him, pine, cold stone, and that wild, untamed edge. It made my pulse stutter strangely. It means you are stronger than you know, he said, his voice dropping to a low, almost intimate register. You are more cunning, more resilient. The Kaelen who hid beneath that log and silenced her own breath while death walked past, she has earned her life. She does not need to drown in guilt to pay for it. How could he see it? How could he look at me and perceive the endless civil war inside, the will to live battling the shame of survival? I don't feel strong, I whispered, confessing to this strange, powerful man in a way I'd never had to anyone. The strongest rarely do, he replied, his gaze holding mine captive. It is the ones who boast of their strength who are often the most hollow. He stood, and the loss of his proximity felt like a chill wind. Maris tells me you are undecided about taking a position in the household. I came here because there was no other path. Now, I don't know what I want. Now you have choices, he finished, for me. Good, you should have choices. He moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the frame. Heal, Kaelen, take your time. When you are ready, we will speak of your future. Whatever you decide, know this, there is a place for you here, not as a ghost in the corners, but as someone who has already proven her worth. He left, closing the door softly behind him.
I sat in the chair for a long time, the winter sun painting bars of light across the floor. Someone who has proven her worth. No one had ever said such a thing to me. No one had ever looked at me as he did, as if I were a question he desperately wanted to answer. It terrified me, more than the rogue lichens, more than the wreckage, more than anything. Because hope, I had learned, was the most dangerous thing of all. Chapter 4. The Library of Forgotten Things. Maris declared me fit for the staff quarters a week later. The leg still ached, a persistent reminder, but I could walk short distances without wanting to cry. She led me through a labyrinth of narrower, plainer corridors, deep in the Citadel's eastern wing. The air here smelled of soap, baking bread, and damp stone, a homely, lived-in scent. You'll be here, she said, opening a door to a room so small it was almost an afterthought. A narrow bed with a wool blanket, a plain chest for belongings, a washstand with a chipped pitcher and bowl, a tiny window that looked out over the training grounds far below. It was austere, barren. It was the first space that had ever been mine alone. Rest today, Maris instructed. Tomorrow you may begin to learn your way. The Citadel is a maze. Do not wander into the royal quarters. Her tone implied severe consequences if I did. The steward, Master Innes, will assign your duties when you are fully recovered. Alone, I sat on the bed, the straw mattress crackling beneath me. Through the window, I could see the training grounds, a vast rectangle of hard-packed earth. Even from this distance, the figures moving there were a study in controlled violence. Drills with sword and spear, hand-to-hand combat that was a brutal, elegant dance. And one figure, moving among them, was different. He didn't wear the distinctive armor of the guards, just simple training clothes, yet every other fighter gave him a wide berth, watched him with a mixture of respect and wariness. The king, training with his warriors as if he were one of them. I watched, unblinking, as he moved. There was a lethal grace to him, a power that was both fluid and utterly final. When one of the men said something, he threw his head back and laughed, a rich, genuine sound that somehow carried all the way up to my lonely window. The sight of it, this powerful, solemn king laughing freely, struck me with a strange force. It made him human in a way nothing else had. The next morning, I met Master Innes, the steward. He was a thin, precise man with a permanently pinched expression, as if he smelled something faintly unpleasant. He looked me over as if assessing a slightly damaged piece of furniture. "Maris says you can manage light duty. Can you read?" "Yes, sir. Not quickly, but I can." His eyebrows lifted a fraction. "A literate orphan. Unusual. Very well. The Royal Archives are in need of organizing. The head archivist, old Corvin, will supervise you. Do not touch anything without his express permission. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do your work and be invisible. That is how one lasts in the Citadel." Be invisible, a directive I was expert at following. The archives were not in the main palace, but in a lower level of the western tower. It was a world of dust and silence. Corvin was indeed old, a hunched man with a wild cloud of white hair and spectacles so thick they magnified his eyes to an owl-like prominence. He peered at me over a stack of crumbling scrolls. "Innes sent you? Can you tell the difference between vellum and papyrus?" "No, sir." "Can you read Old Terran script?" "No, sir." "Can you be quiet?" "Yes, sir." A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his wrinkled face. "Then you are an improvement on the last one," she hummed, drove me to distraction. "Your task is simple. Books are returned to this cart. You will take them and return them to their proper shelf. The system is ordered by continent, then kingdom, then subject, then author, then year. You will learn it. Do not reshelve incorrectly. I will know." I nodded, relief washing over me. A simple, silent task, a world of books. It was perfect. I fell into the rhythm of the archives easily. It was cool, quiet, and smelled of ancient paper, leather, and the peculiar dry scent of very old magic. Sunlight filtered through high, narrow windows, painting golden stripes on the endless rows of dark wood shelves that stretched into shadowy depths. I was a ghost among ghosts, moving silently, my footsteps muffled by a thick carpet of dust. I would take a book from the cart, find its code etched on a small brass plate on the spine, and then embark on a silent treasure hunt through the stacks to find its home. Sometimes I would pause, my fingers would trace a gilded title, or I would let a book fall open to a random page, my eyes skimming beautiful illuminated illustrations of mythical beasts or far-off lands. In these silent halls, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of centuries, I felt a peace I had never known. Here, my past didn't matter. My poverty, my loneliness, the blood on the road, none of it existed. There was only the quiet, the dust, and the stories. But the Citadel's darkness had a way of seeping in. I felt it in the tense silence that fell over the staff when a messenger arrived from the borders, his cloak mud-spottered. I heard it in the hushed, worried conversations Tessa would relay from the kitchens. Another village harassed, another patrol finding only blood and claw marks. And I saw it in him. Our paths crossed rarely, but when they did, it was like lightning striking the same spot twice. He would be striding through a corridor, surrounded by advisors, the serious-faced Nathaniel, his second, the bear-like weapons master, Rylan, and the sharp-eyed scout, Gavriel. They spoke in low, urgent tones, their faces grim. Sometimes he would glance up as he passed, and my eyes would find me, pressed against a wall to let them by. That silver-gold gaze would hold mine for a heartbeat, too, a silent communication I couldn't decipher. Then he would look away, back to the crisis at hand, and the moment would shatter.
One evening, as I was working late, sorting a new delivery of maps, I heard footsteps on the marble stairs leading down to the archives. Not Corvin's shuffling gait. These were firm, measured. He appeared between the shelves, a shadow taking shape in the lamplight. He wore no crown, just dark clothes, but he seemed to fill the narrow aisle. He looked weary, a deep, soul-heavy exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. "You are here late," he said, his voice echoing softly in the quiet. "The maps needed cataloging before the moisture from the messenger's pack damaged them," I replied, my own voice sounding too loud.
He nodded, as if this was a perfectly reasonable explanation for being alone in a basement at night. He walked closer, his eyes scanning the shelves as if looking for a particular volume. He stopped near me, close enough that I could see the faint scar along his jawline, could smell the crisp night air that still clung to him. "The archives suit you," he observed quietly. "It's peaceful. Peace is a rare commodity." He reached out, not toward me, but to the shelf beside my head, his fingers brushing the spine of a large, ancient-looking tome. "Do you know what this section holds?" I glanced at the shelves. Histories of the founding packs, treaties, laws. "Laws," he repeated, the word heavy. "The rules that bind us, that separate civilization from the chaos of the wild." He pulled the book out, its cover embossed with a stylized wolf and a balanced scale. "Sometimes I think the wild understands more of fairness than our laws ever will." It was a startling admission, vulnerable in a way I hadn't expected from a king. "The rogues, they don't follow any law." "No," he agreed, his voice turning cold. "They follow hunger and rage. And now, it seems, a leader who is teaching them to follow strategy." He replaced the book with care. "The attacks grow more coordinated. They are no longer just raids. They are a campaign." The fear I'd been holding at bay whispered through me. "What will you do?" He looked at me then, his eyes intense. "What a king must do. Protect his people. Hunt the threat. Make the choices no one else can make." He paused. "Choices that will cost lives, one way or another." There was a burden in his words, a loneliness that echoed my own, though on a scale I could barely comprehend. He wasn't just a warrior or a ruler. He was a man carrying the weight of thousands of souls on his shoulders, and the strain was etching itself into him. "You saved my life," I said softly. "At great personal risk, you led that search party. You didn't have to." "Yes," he said simply, "I did." He didn't explain. He just stood there, in the pool of lamplight, a king in a library of forgotten things, looking at a maid who was a survivor of a tragedy, and for a moment, the vast gulf between us seemed to vanish. We were just two people, surrounded by silence and the weight of our respective castes. Then, from somewhere high above, a bell tolled, the signal for the changing of the night watch. The spell broke. "It grows late," he said, stepping back. "You should return to your quarters. The Citadel is safe, but the halls are dark." He turned and walked away, his footsteps fading up the stairs. I stood alone, the smell of old paper and his fading scent of night air mixing around me. I had come here to be invisible, to be a ghost among books. So why did I feel for the first time, so painfully, undeniably, seen? Chapter 5. The Shadow of the Howl. Life in the Citadels settled into a new, strange normal. My days were measured in shelves organized, in the soft thump of a book returned to its rightful home, in the rustle of parchment under Corvin's careful hands. I learned to navigate the servants' passages, the back stairways that were the true arteries of the palace. I learned which cooks would slip an extra roll to a quiet girl, which guards would nod in acknowledgement rather than suspicion.
Tessa, the kitchen maid, became my tenuous link to the world outside the archives. She would find me during my midday break, her apron dusted with flour, bearing gossip like treasure. "They're saying the northern granary was hit last night," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Just the grain, though. Took every sack, like they're planning for a long winter in the wilds." Or, "Lady Margot's personal guard came back from patrol with his arm in a sling. He won't say what did it, but Cook saw the bandages, claw marks, she swears it." The fear was a living thing, creeping through the Citadel's stone like frost. It was in the tightened grips on weapon hilts, in the way conversations would halt when a stranger entered the kitchen, in the extra bolts thrown on the outer gates at night. And always, the howls. They came more frequently now, not just at night, a long, lonely sound that would echo down from the crags, making everyone pause, look north, and shiver. I saw the king less, but felt his presence more. The Citadel was preparing for war. Armorers worked through the night, the ringing of their hammers a constant, grim melody. Supply trains arrived daily, and the training grounds were a frenzy of activity from dawn until dusk. When I did glimpse him, he was a figure of focused intensity, surrounded by his commanders, his face a mask of grim concentration. The man who had spoken of fairness in the wild was buried beneath the armor of a king facing a storm. One afternoon, as I was returning a set of agricultural ledgers to the lower stacks, I heard voices echoing in the vaulted chamber above, the main reading room. One voice was calm, measured, the king's. The other was higher, strained with anger. I shouldn't have stopped. I should have faded into the shelves as I was so good at doing, but I didn't. Crouching behind a case of historical tax records, I peered through a gap. The king stood by a large oak table, strewn with maps. Facing him was a man I didn't recognize, tall, richly dressed in the furs and leathers of a northern lord, his face flushed with fury. "You cannot simply fortify the border and wait, sire," the lord was saying, slamming a fist on the table. "They butchered 3 families in my village. Children, Alec. They are not just stealing grain, they're spilling blood. We must take the fight to their dens, burn them out. To do that, Lord Bryn, I would have to strip the southern garrisons, and while my warriors are chasing phantoms in the northern wastes, who guards the Silver Pass, the Duskwood marches? A coordinated attack on one front is a tragedy. An attack on 2 fronts is an extinction." "So we let my people be slaughtered?" Bryn roared. Alec moved then, so fast it was a blur. He didn't strike, but he was suddenly there, inches from the lord, his presence expanding to fill the room. The air grew thick, charged with a pressure that made my skin prickle even from my hiding place. "No," he said, each word dropping like a stone. "No one is being let to be slaughtered. Every death is a failure I carry, but I will not trade the possibility of saving your village for the certainty of losing this kingdom. We find their leader, we cut off the head, the body will die. This is the strategy." Lord Bryn took an involuntary step back, the fight draining from him, replaced with a sullen fear. "And how long will that take?"
"As long as it must." Alaric turned away, a clear dismissal. "Your courage is noted, Bryn. Your people's sacrifices will be remembered. Now go, see to your wounded." The lord left, his footsteps heavy with defeat. Alaric remained at the table, his head bowed, one hand braced on the map as if holding up the very land it depicted. The mask of the king had slipped, and for a moment I saw only the man, tired, angry, and burdened beyond measure. I must have made a sound, a faint intake of breath. His head snapped up, those luminous eyes finding my hiding place instantly. There was no surprise in them. Had he known I was there all along? "Show yourself." It was a soft command, but one I couldn't disobey. I stood, feeling foolish and exposed, and stepped out from behind the shelves. I kept my eyes down, focusing on the intricate pattern of the rug. "Eavesdropping is a dangerous habit in a palace, Kaelen." "I didn't mean to, Your Majesty. I was reshelving." My voice was barely a whisper. "And what is your assessment?" he asked. I looked up, confused. "Of the strategy. The angry lord has a point. Should I send my armies north to chase shadows and leave our heartland undefended?" He was testing me, or perhaps he was just so isolated that he would ask a maid in a library for counsel. I know nothing of war, sire." "You know of survival," he countered, walking around the table toward me. "You made a choice in the forest, to hide, to be silent. It was the correct choice. It saved your life. Was it a fair choice, to save yourself while others were taken?" The question was a knife twisting in the old wound. I shook my head, unable to speak. "Fairness is a luxury of peace," he said, stopping before me. "In war, there are only choices and consequences. Lord Bryn's choice would feel fair, vengeance, immediate action. Its consequence could be the fall of the Citadel. My choice feels like cowardice to him. Its consequence, I hope, will be a lasting victory." He studied my face. "Which would you choose?" I thought of the girls in the wagon, of Leora's laughter. I thought of the young mother at the inn, of the infant's cry. "I would choose the path that saves the most lives in the end, even if it's the harder path to walk now, even if it means carrying the guilt." He was silent for a long moment. Then he gave a single, slow nod. "A wise answer. The weight of the crown is the weight of that guilt. You carry a smaller version of it. I am sorry for that." His apology from a king to a maid left me stunned. Before I could formulate a response, the doors to the reading room burst open. Gabriel, the scout, strode in, his usual calm replaced by urgent intensity. He shot a brief, curious glance at me before addressing Alaric. "Sire, a report from the Western Scouts. The rogues, they've taken hostages." The air in the room turned to ice. Alaric's weariness vanished, replaced by a terrifying, focused stillness. "Where? How many?" "A trading caravan near the Stone River Fork. At least 15. They left a message." Gabriel's jaw worked. "They want to parley." "Lycans do not parley," Alaric said, but his voice held a new grim note. "These ones do. They've named a time and place. 3 days from now. They say they will return one hostage unharmed for every demand met, and they will kill one for every demand refused." The choice was no longer abstract. It was here, now, brutal and immediate. I saw the calculation flash in Alaric's eyes, the lives of 15 against the sovereignty of his kingdom, against the safety of thousands. "Assemble the war council," he said, his voice like grinding stone. "Now." As Gabriel left, Alaric turned back to me. All traces of our previous conversation were gone, burned away by the emergency. "You should go." I didn't need to be told twice. I fled the reading room, the image of his tormented face seared into my mind. I hurried back to the safety of the lower archives, my heart pounding, but I knew nowhere in the Citadel was safe from the decision now hanging in the air. That night, the howls from the mountains were closer than ever. They didn't sound lonely anymore. They sounded like a challenge. Chapter 6. The Weight of a Crown. The Citadel held its breath for 3 days. The tension was a physical thing, a wire pulled taut in every corridor, in every guarded glance. The usual sounds, the clatter from the kitchens, the chatter of servants, were hushed, muted. Everyone moved with a grim purpose, waiting for the axe to fall. I threw myself into my work in the archives with a desperate focus, organizing, cleaning, cataloging, anything to keep my mind from circling the terrible dilemma I'd overheard. The fate of 15 souls balanced against the peace of a nation. I found my thoughts constantly drifting to the upper levels, imagining the War Council locked in fierce, silent debate. Old Corvin noticed my distraction. He peered over a ledger one afternoon, his magnified eyes blinking slowly. "The weight of the world is not yours to carry, girl. It is his, and he is strong enough to bear it." "How can you be sure?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Corvin set down his quill. "I have served 3 kings. The first was brave but reckless. The second was wise but weak. Alaric, he has the strength of the first and the mind of the second, tempered in a fire I wish he had never known. He will make the choice that breaks his own heart before he makes the one that breaks his kingdom. That is the definition of a true king." His words were meant to comfort, but they only made the dread deepen. A choice that breaks his own heart. On the morning of the 3rd day, a strange silence descended. The training grounds were empty. The main gates remained shut. The entire Citadel seemed to be waiting, listening. I couldn't bear the archives. I slipped out, using the servants' passages to make my way to a little-used balcony that overlooked the main courtyard. Hidden behind a stone pillar, I watched. A company of warriors, perhaps 50 strong, stood at attention. They were not in full battle regalia, but they wore hardened leather and carried serious weapons. At their head stood Alaric. He wore a silver-gray tunic, the crest of the Terran wolf embroidered in black over his heart. He looked calm, but I could see the tension in the line of his shoulders, in the way he held his head, like a wolf listening for the pack.
They wore scraps of armor and animal pelts, their hair wild, their eyes glowing with that same amber light. But they walked on 2 legs, and they carried themselves not as mindless beasts, but as envoys. At their center was a massive male with a jagged scar running from his temple to his chin, their leader. The 2 groups faced each other in the vast, silent courtyard. The air crackled with hostility so potent I could feel it from my hiding place. The scarred rogue spoke first, his voice a rough growl that carried easily. "King Alaric, you received our terms?" "I did." Alaric's voice was clear, cold, and rang off the stone. "You will return the hostages, unharmed, now. Then you will disband and submit to the jurisdiction of the nearest lawful pack for judgment." A low rumble of laughter came from the rogues, the leader grinning, showing sharp teeth. "You misunderstand," the leader said, grinning, showing sharp teeth. "We are not here to surrender. We are here to see if you are smart enough to negotiate. Our terms stand. The Western hunting lands, recognition as a sovereign pack, safe passage through your territories. And if I refuse?" The rogue's smile vanished. "Then the river runs red with the blood of your people, starting today." I gripped the cold stone of the pillar, my knuckles white. This was it, the moment of choice. Alaric didn't move. He didn't look at his commanders for reassurance. He simply stared at the rogue leader, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then Alaric spoke, and his words changed everything. "I invoke the right of challenge." A murmur, shocked and sudden, rippled through both the warriors and the rogues. Even the scarred leader looked taken aback. An ancient law, Alaric continued, his voice gaining power, from the first accords. A dispute between packs may be settled by single combat between their champions. No armies, no more innocent blood. Your champion against mine. If you win, your terms are met. If I win, you release the hostages, disband, and your people submit to exile beyond the Black Peaks. The rogue leader recovered quickly, a cunning light in his eyes. You would fight for them, yourself? I am the Alpha of the Terran Dominion, Alaric said, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. Do you accept the challenge? The rogue clearly saw an opportunity. He was massive, a born brawler. He likely thought he could tear this polished king apart. He grinned again, that savage, toothy expression. I accept. Here, now. 3 days, Alaric said, at the standing stones in the Grey Valley, neutral ground. Messengers will be summoned from the elder packs. The rogue nodded once, sharply. 3 days. Prepare to lose your kingdom, little king. He turned, and his band slunk back toward the gate, melting into the shadows of the tunnel. The moment they were gone, the courtyard erupted. Nathaniel was at Alaric's side instantly, his face pale with anger. Sire, you cannot. It's a trap. He's a monster from the pits. He is their leader. Alaric cut him off, his voice calm but final. This is the way. One life risked instead of hundreds. The hostages have a chance. He turned and strode back toward the Citadel, his commanders falling into step beside him, arguing in vehement whispers. I sank down behind the pillar, my legs unable to hold me. The right of challenge. He had found a third option, one that put his own life directly on the line. For 3 days, the Citadel's mood shifted from dread to a frenetic, anxious energy. The standing stones were prepared, messengers flew to the elder packs, armorers worked day and night on a specific light set of fighting leathers. Alaric trained with Rylan in the yards, sessions that were less about practice and more about testing limits, a brutal, breathtaking display of speed and power. I saw him only once. He was crossing a courtyard at dusk, alone for a moment. He looked up, and his eyes found mine where I stood in an archway. He didn't smile. He simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if sharing a secret. Then he was gone. The night before the challenge, sleep was impossible. I left my room and wandered the silent halls, drawn inevitably toward the one place that felt like sanctuary. The archives were dark, lit only by the moonlight through the high windows. I didn't light a lamp. I just stood among the towering shelves, my hand resting on the cool leather of a book spine, trying to find peace in the familiar silence. I heard his footsteps on the stairs. I knew it was him. He emerged from the darkness like part of it, dressed in simple clothes, his hair tousled as if he too had been seeking escape from his own thoughts. You should be resting, he said, his voice soft in the vast quiet. So should you, I replied, the words out before I could think. He came to stand near me, not looking at the books, but at the moonbeam cutting a silver path through the dust motes. Rest eludes me tonight. Are you afraid? The question was a whisper. He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Yes, he said finally, the admission raw and honest. Not of dying, but of failing. Those 15 lives, my people's faith, it all rests on my skill tomorrow. That is a heavier weight than any fear of pain. I turned to face him. In the moonlight, he looked younger, the lines of worry and kingship smoothed away. He was just a man, bearing an impossible burden. You won't fail. How can you be sure? He echoed my question from days before, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. "Because you have to," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Because you are not just fighting for a kingdom, you are fighting for the principle that one life can be worth risking everything for. You proved that when you saved mine." I took a step closer, the space between us humming with something unspoken. "Kaelen." He breathed my name like a prayer. "You have no idea what you are, do you?" Before I could answer, before I could even think, a distant bell chimed the midnight hour. The moment shattered. He dropped his hand, the king's mask settling back into place, though his eyes still burned. "Dawn comes early. You should go." I left him standing there in the library of forgotten things, the ghost of his touch on my skin, my words hanging in the air between us. I had meant every one, and as I walked back to my cold, small room, I realized with a jolt that somewhere between the wreckage and the moonlight, my survival had become inextricably tangled with his. And tomorrow he would walk into a circle of stones, and I might lose him just as I was beginning to understand what that meant. Chapter 7: The Circle of Stones. Dawn on the day of the challenge arrived cloaked in a thin, freezing fog. The gray valley lived up to its name, a barren, rocky basin between two arms of the mountains, dominated by a circle of 9 towering, weathered monoliths, the Standing Stones. They jutted from the earth like the petrified fingers of a buried giant, silent witnesses to centuries of history, and now to this. I traveled in a closed carriage with Maris and several senior members of the household. No one spoke. The only sounds were the creak of wheels, the clop of hooves, and the distant, mournful cry of a hawk. Maris sat stiffly beside me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When I glanced at her, she gave me a brief, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The valley was already crowded when we arrived. On one side, the disciplined ranks of the Citadel's warriors, their armor and banners a splash of color against the gray. On the other, a restless, shifting crowd of rogues, perhaps 200 of them, clad in furs and hides, their eyes gleaming with a feral anticipation. Between them, in the center of the stone circle, was an open space of hard-packed earth. And there, at the forefront of his people, stood Alaric. He looked like a figure from an old legend. He wore the armor his smiths had crafted, supple, darkened leather, reinforced with bands of steel at the joints and vitals. No helmet. His raven black hair was tied back, revealing the stark, determined lines of his face. He was speaking quietly with Nathaniel, who looked as if he'd swallowed something sour, and Rylan, who was checking the fit of his van braces with a critical eye. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. He has to win. He has to. From the rogue side, their champion emerged, the scarred leader. He was even larger than I remembered, a mountain of muscle and menace. He wore pieces of mismatched armor and carried a brutal, notched axe in one hand. He grinned at Alaric across the distance, a gesture full of cruel promise. An elderly lichen, her fur silvered with age and wearing the simple gray robe of a neutral arbiter from the elder packs, stepped into the center. Her voice, amplified by the natural acoustics of the valley, rang out clear and cold. "We gather under the eyes of our ancestors and the law of the First Accords. The Terran Dominion under Alpha Alaric has invoked the right of challenge against the unaligned pack under Karth. The terms are thus: combat to submission or death. The victor's terms, as stated, will be binding. Do both champions affirm?" "I affirm." Alaric's voice was steady, carrying absolute authority. "I affirm," Karth growled, hefting his axe. "Then let the challenge begin." The arbiter retreated to the edge of the circle. The valley fell into silence so complete I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. They circled each other, two predators taking measure. Karth moved with a heavy, powerful grace, all coiled aggression. Alaric was lighter on his feet, a dancer where the other was a brawler, his movements economical, his eyes never leaving his opponent. Karth struck first. A roar tore from his throat as he charged, axe swinging in a deadly arc meant to cleave Alaric in two. Alaric didn't block. He flowed inside the swing, ducking under the axe head, his own body becoming a weapon as he drove a shoulder into Karth's ribs. The impact was a sickening thud. Karth grunted, stumbling back, surprise flashing across his scarred face. The fight was nothing like the training drills. It was raw, brutal, and horrifically fast. Karth was sheer, overwhelming power. Every blow from his fists or his axe would have shattered stone. But Alaric was a phantom. He parried what he couldn't avoid, redirected force he couldn't match, and struck back with pinpoint precision, elbows, knees, the heel of his palm, targeting joints, pressure points, the weak spots in Karth's crude armor. Soon, both were bleeding. A gash opened on Alaric's forearm from a glancing axe blow. Karth had a split lip and was favoring one leg where Alaric had hammered his knee. The crowd on both sides was a living entity, roaring with each clash, gasping with each near miss. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. My hands were fists pressed against my mouth. Karth, frustrated, changed tactics. He feinted high with the axe, then dropped low, shifting form in a blur of motion. One moment he was a man, the next a massive, wolf-like beast, surging forward with jaws wide enough to crush Alaric's skull. A scream lodged in my throat. Alaric didn't flinch. As the beast lunged, he moved toward it. In a move of breathtaking audacity, he dropped onto his back, kicked up with both legs, and used the creature's own momentum to flip it over his head. The rogue lichen crashed to the ground with a yelp of pain, shifting back to human form as he landed awkwardly. Alaric was on him in an instant. He planted a foot on Karth's wrist, pinning the axe hand, and his knife, a blade I hadn't even seen him draw, was at the rogue's throat. "Submit," Alaric commanded, his voice ragged but clear. The valley held its breath. Karth glared up, hatred burning in his eyes. He struggled, but Alaric's weight was unyielding, the knife point drawing a bead of blood. "Submit," Alaric repeated, louder, "and your people live. They will have their chance in the west. Refuse, and this ends here, and they scatter to the winds, hunted." I saw the calculation in Karth's eyes, pride versus survival for his pack. The fury slowly bled out, replaced by a sullen, defeated understanding. His body went slack. "I submit," he grated out, the words clearly torturous to speak. A deafening roar erupted from the Citadel's side. The warriors beat their weapons against their shields in a thunderous rhythm. The rogues were silent, some looking away, others watching with a strange, weary respect. Alaric removed his foot and stepped back, sheathing his knife. He didn't gloat. He simply stood, breathing heavily, as the arbiter returned to the center. "The challenge is decided. Alpha Alaric of the Terran Dominion is victorious. The terms of his victory are now law. Hostages will be released immediately. The unaligned pack will be disbanded and journey to the Western Territories under escort, where they may petition the Elder Council for status." It was over. He'd done it. He'd won. The formalities began, the signing of the accord on a portable scribe's desk, the orders given for the hostage release. But my eyes were only for him. As his men surrounded him, clapping him on the back, he looked across the sea of faces.
And he found me. Through the crowd, over the heads of celebrating warriors, our gazes locked. Exhaustion, relief, and something else, something fierce and bright flared in his eyes. He gave me that same slight, private nod from before, a shared secret in the midst of triumph. Then, to my utter shock, he began to walk. Not toward his commanders, not toward the waiting horses, he walked toward me. The crowd instinctively parted for their king. Maris tensed beside me. A path cleared between us, and he stopped before me, close enough that I could see the sweat and blood on his skin, smell the iron and earth scent of the fight. The celebrating noise seemed to fade into a distant hum. He was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling. He looked down at me, and in his eyes, the king was gone again. It was just Alaric. "You came," he said, his voice rough. "I told you to have faith," I whispered back. A slow, true smile broke across his face, transforming it, making him look young and triumphant and alive. It seems I was right to. He didn't touch me, he didn't say anything more, but in that moment, standing in the circle of ancient stones, with the weight of a kingdom lifted from his shoulders, the look he gave me spoke volumes. It was a look of gratitude, of acknowledgement, and of a promise for a conversation not yet begun. Then Nathaniel was at his side, speaking of the hostages arriving, of arrangements to be made. The king's mantle settled back onto his shoulders. He gave me one last, lingering look, then turned and was swallowed by his duties. But the image was burned into my soul. The victorious king, bloodied and weary, seeking out the eyes of a library maid in the crowd. The invisible girl was invisible no more. And as we rode back to the Citadel, the fog lifting to reveal a clear, cold sky, I knew with a certainty that shook me to my core. My story was no longer just about survival. It had become irrevocably intertwined with his. Chapter 8. The Unspoken Promise. Victory tasted like cold, clear air and quiet exhaustion. The Citadel welcomed its king back not with raucous celebration, but with a profound collective sigh of relief. The hostages, 15 frightened but unharmed merchants and travelers, were brought in by Gavriel's scouts that evening. Their tearful reunions in the lower courtyard were a silent, powerful testament to the risk Alaric had taken. The rogue pack, under watchful guard, began their somber trek west. The immediate threat was neutralized. Life, in its way, resumed, but nothing was the same. For me, the archives were no longer just a hiding place. They were a sanctuary where I turned over the events in the Grey Valley like precious, frightening gems. The memory of his fight, the terrifying grace, the brutal efficiency, the final, merciful restraint, played behind my eyes when I tried to sleep. But sharper still was the memory of him walking toward me through the crowd, his eyes holding mine. I saw him only once in the week that followed. He was in the main library, consulting with Corvin over a set of ancient border maps. I was on a ladder, dusting a high shelf, doing my best to be the ghost I was supposed to be. I felt his gaze like sunlight on my skin. When I dared a glance down, he was looking at me, a thoughtful expression on his face. He didn't smile, he just held my gaze for a long moment before Corvin pointed something out on the map, reclaiming his attention. The look was a question, an unspoken, "What now?" I had no answer. It was Tessa, of all people, who forced the issue. She cornered me in a quiet corridor near the laundry, her usual cheer replaced by a nervous intensity. "They're talking about you, you know," she said, wringing her apron in her hands. A cold trickle of dread went down my spine. "Who? What are they saying?" "Everyone, the guards, the senior maids, even some of the lesser nobles hanging about court. They're saying the king has taken an interest." "An interest in a survivor of an attack he felt responsible for," I said quickly, my voice too sharp.
Tessa gave me a look that was far wiser than her years. Kaelen, I've served here since I was 12. I've seen ladies of every great house throw themselves in his path. I've seen him look right through them like they were made of glass. He doesn't have interests, he has duties. But the way he looked at you, that wasn't duty. Her words left me flustered and afraid. Being invisible had kept me safe. Being seen by the king was like standing on a cliff edge in a storm. The storm, when it came, arrived in the form of Lady Alara. I learned her name later. She was a cousin to some northern lord visiting the Citadel with her father. She found me alone in a secondary garden, gathering late-blooming herbs for Maris's stores. "You're the one, aren't you?" she said, her voice cool, cultured, and devoid of warmth. She was beautiful in a sharp, polished way, like an icicle. I straightened, brushing dirt from my hands. "My lady?" "The wagon girl, the one he rescued." She looked me up and down, her pale blue eyes missing nothing. The simple servant's dress, the calluses on my hands, the lack of any ornament. A faint, condescending smile touched her lips. How quaint. I suppose even kings enjoy a project, a broken thing to fix. Her words were designed to wound, to put me back in my place, and they did. The old shame, the feeling of being less, rose up like bile. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. "Let me offer you some advice, girl. Know your place. Enjoy the notoriety while it lasts, but understand this. Kings may amuse themselves with curiosities, but they marry for alliances, for strength, for bloodlines. They do not marry scavengers from the roadside." She turned and left. The scent of expensive perfume lingered in her wake. I stood there, my face burning, her cruel words echoing in the silent garden. She was right. Of course she was right. What was I thinking? A king and a maid? It was a fairy tale for children, and I had stopped believing in those long ago. The encounter cast a pall over everything. That evening, as I sorted through a box of donated texts in the archives, the words on the pages blurred. Lady Alara's voice was a poison in my mind. A broken thing to fix. A curiosity. The words are on the page, but your eyes are elsewhere. I jumped, nearly upsetting the box. Alaric stood in the doorway of the small side chamber. He was alone, dressed once more in simple dark clothes, a shadow in the lamplight. How long had he been watching? "Your Majesty?" I stammered, rising quickly. "Alaric," he corrected softly, stepping into the room. "When we are alone, please." The request, the intimacy of it, sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I shouldn't. Why? He leaned against a reading desk, crossing his arms. He looked tired, but his gaze was alert, fixed on me. "Because I am a servant, and you are the king." The words sounded pathetic even to my own ears. "Titles," he dismissed with a faint wave of his hand. "They are masks we wear for the world. In this room, there are no titles. There is just a man who fought a battle and the woman who gave him a reason to believe he could win it." My breath caught. "I didn't do anything." "You told me to fight for the girl in the forest," he said, his voice dropping. "You told me to fight for the principle that one life is worth everything. No one has ever spoken to me like that, not as a king, but as a man. They give me strategies, reports, flattery. You gave me a truth." He pushed off the desk and took a step closer. I didn't retreat. I couldn't. The world is full of people who want something from the crown. Power, influence, wealth. You looked at me covered in blood and dirt and saw something worth saving. You asked for nothing. "I have nothing to give," I whispered, Lady Alara's words ringing in my ears. "You are wrong." He was close enough now that I could see the flecks of amber in his gray eyes, could see the earnest intensity in them. You have courage, you have resilience, you have a quiet strength that does not need to shout to be felt. You see people, not positions. In a world of politics and deception, that is rarer than any gem. He reached out, his hand hovering near my cheek before he seemed to think better of it and let it fall to his side. The restraint in the gesture was more powerful than any touch. I do not wish to fix you, Kaelen. You are not broken. You are whole, in a way I have not felt in a very long time. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. He was dismantling every defense, every lie I'd told myself. What are you saying? I am saying that my interest is not a passing amusement. His voice was firm, sure. I am saying that I wish to know you, truly, with no titles between us, if you will allow it. It was a request, not a command, a choice laid at my feet, the most terrifying choice I had ever been offered. I thought of the wreckage, of the claws in the dirt, of the lonely road. I thought of the quiet peace of the archives, of being invisible and safe. Then I looked into his eyes, so full of a fierce, hopeful honesty, and I thought of the man who had knelt in the circle of stones, offering mercy instead of death. Safety was an illusion, hope was a risk, but perhaps some risks were worth taking. Slowly, I nodded. I would like that, I said, my voice barely audible. The smile that broke across his face was worth every fear. It wasn't the triumphant smile of the victor at the stones. It was softer, warmer, a sunrise after a long night. Good, he said simply. Then we shall begin. He didn't stay long. He had a council meeting, he said. But before he left, he turned at the door. Meet me tomorrow in the Queen's Garden at midday. It is private. We can speak without masks. He was gone, leaving me standing amid the dusty books and the lingering scent of him, pine and night air and hope. I touched my cheek where his hand had almost been. The invisible girl was gone. In her place stood Kaelen, who had been seen by a king. And for the first time, I didn't want to hide. Chapter 9, The Queen's Garden. The Queen's Garden was a secret place, tucked behind a high, ivy-covered wall in the oldest part of the Citadel. It was said to have been planted by the first queen centuries ago for solitude and reflection. It was not on any servant's cleaning route. I only found it because Alaric had sent a quiet, elderly guard to guide me there at the appointed time. The guard, Torvin, merely nodded to a small, almost hidden door in the wall, then melted back into the shadows. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. The world inside was a revelation. Winter had touched here too, but gently. Evergreen hedges formed sheltered walks. Frost-kissed rosemary and sage spilled from stone planters, their scents sharp in the cold air. A small, ice-rimmed fountain murmured in the center, and everywhere, winter-blooming flowers, hellebores with their bowed, delicate faces, spiky witch hazel with its fiery yellow blooms, defied the season with quiet tenacity. He was waiting by the fountain, his back to me, looking at the frozen water. "It's beautiful," I said, my voice hushed in the stillness. He turned, and the smile that warmed his eyes was a private, gentle thing. "It is my favorite place in the entire Citadel, the only place where the weight of the crown feels lighter." He gestured to a stone bench, cleared of snow. "Will you sit?" We sat, a careful, polite distance between us. The silence wasn't awkward, but charged, full of things unsaid. "I began to tell you to know me," staring at my hands in my lap. "There's not much to know. An orphan, a survivor, a maid." "Tell me about the orphan," he asked, not as a king demanding a report, but as someone genuinely curious. So I did. In fits and starts, I told him of the vague memories of parents lost to a fever, of the cold, impersonal charity of the orphanage, of the gnawing hunger that was both physical and a hunger for belonging, of my aunt's reluctant roof and the final relief in her eyes when she signed the maid's contract. I didn't embellish. I didn't ask for pity. I simply stated the facts of a life that had been small and hard. He listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on the frost patterns on the fountain. When he finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "My parents died when I was 15, he said, his own voice quiet. A border ambush, not rogues, but a rival pack seeking territory. My father, the king, and my mother, his Luna, fought side by side. They died together." He paused, the memory clearly still raw after all these years. "I was not ready. My brother, he was the heir, the golden one, charismatic, a born leader. I was the spare, the scholar, the one who preferred books to blades." This was a history I had never heard whispered. The official story was simply tragedy. "What happened?" I asked softly.
"Grief happened," Alaric said, his jaw tightening. "And anger. My brother sought vengeance. He led a retaliatory strike deep into enemy lands. It was a trap. He and half our warriors never returned." He looked at me, his eyes bleak. "In a single season, I lost my family and became king, the bookish spare, suddenly responsible for a kingdom grieving and enraged. I had to learn to fight, to lead, to be hard where I wanted to be kind. I had to become the wolf they needed, not the man I was." His confession laid him bare. The solemn, powerful king was a shell, forged in unimaginable loss and duty. Inside was still that bookish boy, carrying wounds that never fully healed. You became both, the wolf and the man. You showed mercy at the stones. That was not just a king's strategy, that was the man's heart. He looked at me, a mixture of surprise and gratitude in his eyes. "You see that?" "It's all I see," I whispered. The air between us seemed to grow warmer despite the winter chill. The careful distance on the bench felt like a vast, silly chasm. "Why me, Alaric?" The question burst out of me, the one that had haunted me since the courtyard. You could have anyone, ladies of noble houses, daughters of allied alphas. Why look twice at a wounded girl from a wagon? He didn't answer immediately. He stood and walked to a hellebore, cupping its bowed bloom gently in his hand. "When I found you on that road, you were half dead, but your eyes, they were awake. They were fierce. You looked at me not with the awe one gives a king, nor the fear one gives a predator. You looked at me with assessment, as if you were deciding whether I was worthy of your trust." He turned back to me. "In that moment, you were not a victim. You were a warrior who had lost a battle, but not the war. That strength, that core of unbroken self, it called to something in me, something I thought I had buried with my brother." He came back to the bench, sitting closer this time. "The ladies of court, they see the crown. They see a match, an alliance. You saw me, the man who is tired, who carries ghosts, who loves quiet gardens and old books. You didn't seek me out. I had to find you. And in finding you, I found a part of myself I thought was lost." His words were a balm and a brand. They healed the wounds Lady Alara's poison had left, and they seared away my last defenses. He wasn't offering pity or a king's favor. He was offering recognition, soul seeing soul. "I am afraid," I admitted, the truest confession of all. "So am I," he said, without shame. "This is uncharted territory for us both, but I would rather walk into that uncertainty with you than stand still in safe loneliness without you." He held out his hand, palm up on the space between us, not to pull me, not to claim me, an offering, an invitation.
I looked at his hand, strong and scarred, a king's hand that had just touched a flower with infinite gentleness. I looked into his eyes, silver gold and full of a hope that mirrored my own terrifying, wonderful hope. Slowly, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and sure. No bolt of lightning, no dramatic tremor, just a perfect, solid fit. A connection that felt less like something new and more like something remembered. A coming home. We sat like that in the silent, winter-struck garden, hands clasped, no titles between us, just Alaric and Kaelen, and for the first time in both our lives, perhaps, we were not alone. Chapter 10. The Court's Whisper. The Queen's garden became our sanctuary. For an hour each afternoon, when his duties and my work allowed, we would meet. Torvin would stand silent guard at the hidden door, and within the walls the world shrank to just us. We talked of everything. He told me of the complexities of pack politics, the delicate balance of tradition and progress. I told him of the small dramas of the servants' halls, of Corvin's eccentricities, of Tessa's latest culinary disasters. He brought me books from his personal collection, poetry, philosophy, histories of stars. I, in turn, shared the quiet wonders I found in the archives, a sketch of an extinct flower, a merchant's account of a city built on canals, a child's rhyme scribbled centuries ago in a margin. It was a courtship of minds and whispered confidences, as chaste and careful as the first frost. He never tried to kiss me. His touches were fleeting, a hand guiding me over a rough patch of path, his fingers brushing mine as he handed me a book. Each one was a conscious gift, a testament to his respect. This halcyon pace, this building of a foundation before any thought of a roof, was more intimate than any rushed passion could have been. It made me feel cherished, not coveted. But the walls of the garden could not hold back the world. The court noticed. Of course they noticed. The king was disappearing at odd hours. He was seen smiling more, a faint, distant expression that had nothing to do with council reports. Whispers slithered through the corridors like cold drafts. I felt their eyes on me, the servants, the guards, the visiting nobles. The looks ranged from curious to calculating to openly hostile. My invisibility was utterly gone. I was now a focal point, a mystery to be solved. Nathaniel, Alaric's second, was the first to confront me directly. I was crossing an upper courtyard when he fell into step beside me, his manner deceptively casual. "Kaelen, a moment." "Commander," I acknowledged, my heart sinking. "The king, he values your perspective. Your unique experience has been insightful for him." "I am glad to be of service," I replied, the standard, safe response. He stopped, forcing me to stop as well. His blue eyes were sharp, but not unkind. "The king, he values your perspective. Your unique experience has been insightful for him." "I am glad to be of service," I replied, the standard, safe response. He stopped, forcing me to stop as well. His blue eyes were sharp, but not unkind. "That being said, I need to understand, what are your intentions?" The question was so similar to Lady Alara's, yet the tone was utterly different. This was not about social climbing. This was about protecting his king, his friend, his alpha. "My intentions are to be his friend, to listen, to offer honesty where he receives so much flattery. Nothing more, nothing less." Nathaniel studied me for a long, silent moment. I held my ground. Finally, he nodded once. "Good, because if you hurt him, survivor or not, you will answer to me, and I am less patient than His Majesty." The threat was clear, calmly delivered, and I believed it completely. "Understood." His expression softened a fraction. "He needs someone who isn't part of all this," he said, gesturing vaguely at the palace around us. "Someone who reminds him what he's fighting for. Just be careful, Kaelen, for both your sakes." The court is a nest of vipers, and you have just become very interesting prey."
He walked away, leaving me with a fresh chill of apprehension. Nathaniel's warning was a bucket of cold reality. This wasn't just about two people in a garden. It was about politics, power, and the volatile attention of a kingdom. The viper struck sooner than I expected. A delegation from a southern pack, the Silvermane, arrived for treaty renewals. Their alpha, a proud man named Goran, brought his daughter, Lyra. She was stunning, tall, with hair like spun copper and a confident grace that turned heads. At the welcoming feast, which I observed from the high servants' gallery, she was placed near Alaric. She was witty, intelligent, and clearly interested. I watched Alaric be polite, engaged, but distant. His eyes, however, kept drifting upward, searching the shadows of the gallery. When they found me, a faint private smile would touch his lips before he returned his attention to Lady Lyra. The contrast was not lost on anyone. After the feast, as I hurried through a less used passage to avoid the crowds, I heard voices from an alcove. Lady Lyra's clear, carrying tone, and another I recognized, Lady Alara's. Paying attention to some scrap of a human he found on the road, it's an embarrassment. "Father says it's a temporary fascination," Lyra replied, her voice cool. "A king under stress, a damsel in distress. A classic tale. He will tire of it when he remembers his responsibilities." "One can only hope," Alara sniffed, "before he does something irrevocably foolish." Their words were like shards of ice in my chest. They voiced my deepest fears, that this was an illusion, a king's temporary diversion. I fled back to the archives, to the dusty, silent shelves that didn't judge or conspire. Alaric found me there later, my composure barely patched together. He took one look at my face and his own tightened. "What happened?" I shook my head, not wanting to give voice to the poisonous whispers. "Nothing, it's nothing." "Kaelen," he used that tone, the one that was both gentle and immovable. "Tell me." So I did. I repeated the lady's conversation, my face burning with humiliation. When I finished, I expected anger, dismissal, perhaps even agreement. Instead, he looked resolved. "Come with me," he said. "What? Where?" "To the Hall of Windows, now." The Hall of Windows was a vast, beautiful space used for large gatherings, its southern wall made entirely of stained glass that depicted the history of the Terran Dominion. A reception for the Silvermane delegation was winding down there. Dozens of nobles, commanders, and dignitaries mingled. Before I could protest, Alaric took my hand, not a hidden, gentle clasp, but a firm, public hold, and led me into the hall. A stunned silence fell, rippling out from our entrance like a wave. Every eye in the room turned to us, to our joined hands. I saw Lady Alara's shocked face, Lady Lyra's composed mask slip into confusion. Nathaniel's eyebrows shot up. Rylan just grinned. Alaric didn't stop. He led me to the center of the room, under the great glass wolf that was the centerpiece of the window. Then he turned to face the assembly, still holding my hand. His voice, when he spoke, carried easily in the hushed space. "My friends, allies, you have all heard the rumors, seen the whispers. Let me end them now." He glanced at me, his eyes fierce and proud, then back to the crowd. "This is Kaelen. She is not a scrap from the road. She is not a temporary fascination. She is the bravest person I have ever known. She survived what would have broken others. She sees the world and me with a clarity that is a gift. She has my respect, my trust, and my deepest regard." He wasn't declaring love, he wasn't making promises, but he was stating a truth, publicly and unequivocally. He was claiming my place at his side, not as a mistress or a secret, but as a person of worth. The silence deepened.
then broke into a murmur of surprise, speculation, and here and there, approval. Nathaniel gave a slow, respectful nod. Lady Lyra's father, Alpha Gorin, looked thoughtfully from Alaric to me, then gave a curt, acknowledging bow of his head. Alaric squeezed my hand and leaned close, his words for me alone. "Let them see. Let them know. You are not prey, Kaelen. You are under my protection, and more importantly, you are my friend." He led us from the hall, the whispers rising behind us, but they felt different now. They were not just about a mysterious maid. They were about the woman the king had just publicly, defiantly honored. The invisible girl was gone forever. In her place stood Kaelen, hand in hand with a king, walking into the storm of courtly attention. And for the first time, I was not afraid to be seen. Chapter 11. The Poisoned Page. Public acknowledgement was a sword that cut both ways. Overnight, my existence became formalized. I was given new quarters, still in the staff wing, but larger, with a lovely window and a small writing desk. My duties in the archives remained, but Corvin now treated me with a curious, respectful distance, often asking my opinion on restoration techniques. Servants who had ignored me now bowed their heads. The hostile stares from some nobles became more veiled, but no less sharp. I was no longer a rumor, I was a fact, and facts in a court must be dealt with. Alaric and I continued our meetings in the Queen's garden, but they felt different now. The secrecy was replaced by a guarded privacy. Torvin's presence at the gate was more pronounced. Our conversations, while still easy, now sometimes touched on the realities of my new position, the etiquette lessons Maris had insisted I take, the subtle politics of the household staff. "I never wanted to make your life more difficult," Alaric said, watching me fret over the correct way to address a visiting duchess. "You didn't," I said, managing a smile. "You made it visible. Difficult is just part of the scenery now." He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead, a touch that never failed to send a warm shock through me. "You wear it well, better than I do most days." It was during this time of tense adjustment that the first threat arrived, not a physical one, but something more insidious. I returned to my new room one evening to find a single folded piece of parchment on my desk. It was fine vellum, expensive. There was no seal, no name. Inside, in elegant slanted vit, were 5 lines. "The wolf may admire the sparrow's song, and shelter it from storm and throng. But when the winter winds blow fierce and long, the wolf must hunt to feed the strong. Remember, little bird, where you belong." The words were a chill down my spine, a pretty poetic warning. I was the sparrow, a temporary amusement. He was the wolf who would eventually return to his true nature, to hunting, to politics, to a mate of appropriate strength and bloodline. Remember where you belong, in the shadows, in the dirt. My first instinct was to burn it. My second was to show Alaric. But a stubborn pride rose in me. I had faced down rogue lichens. I would not be cowed by anonymous poetry. I tucked the note into a book of herbology, a deliberate hiding in plain sight, and said nothing. The second note came 2 days later, slipped under my door. This one was shorter, blunter. "Stone walls have ears. Garden walls have eyes. Nothing is private. Nothing is wise." Paranoia, a seed planted by the first note, now sprouted thorns. I looked at Torvin differently, at every servant who passed me in the hall. Was it Lady Alara, a jealous noble, someone who genuinely believed I was a danger to the kingdom? The final note arrived the next evening. I found it placed precisely in the center of my pillow. This one contained no poetry, just a single, stark sentence written in what looked like charcoal. "The forest remembers the scent of blood." It was a direct reference to the Wagon attack,
a reminder that my survival was tied to trauma, that I was fundamentally marked by violence and loss, that I would always be the girl from the wreckage. This I could not ignore. The malice was too pointed, the invasion too complete. With the note crumpled in my fist, I went to find Alaric. He was in his private study, a room of books and maps, much like the library, but warmer, lived in. He took one look at my face and was on his feet. "What is it?" I handed him the notes without a word. He read them, his expression growing darker with each one. By the third, a low, dangerous growl rumbled in his chest, a purely animal sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. The wolf was close to the surface. "When did these come?" I told him. The cold fury in his eyes was terrifying. "This is not just gossip," he said, his voice lethally quiet. "This is a campaign, intimidation, a threat to your peace of mind, which is a threat to me." He strode to the door and called for Nathaniel and Gavriel. They arrived swiftly. Alaric showed them the notes. Nathaniel's face went stony. Gavriel, the scout, took them, sniffed the paper delicately, and frowned. "The vellum is common court stock. The ink is standard scribe's issue. The charcoal, from the kitchens, most likely. Whoever it is, they're being careful to use untraceable materials." He looked at the third note again. "The forest remembers. That's personal. They know about the attack in detail, not just court gossip." "A guard who was on the search party," Nathaniel suggested. "Or someone who debriefed them," Alaric said, his mind working. "Or someone who has access to official reports." He turned to me, his anger banked into a smoldering protectiveness. "You will have a guard, around the clock. Torvin and 2 others I trust implicitly." "Alaric, no," I protested. "That will just make me more of a target, more of a spectacle." "It will keep you safe," he interrupted, gently but firmly. "And it will send a message that you are under the direct protection of the crown, that threats to you are treason." He looked back at his commanders. "I want this found, quietly but thoroughly. Use whatever resources you need." After they left, he came to me, his hands coming up to cradle my face. "I am sorry, Kaelen. This is my world. Its shadows are long, and its knives are sharp. I brought you into the light, and the light has attracted moths, and worse." "I'm not afraid of moths," I said, leaning into his touch, drawing strength from his solidity. "You should be," he murmured. "Some moths carry poison." He sighed, his thumb stroking my cheek. "I must attend a trade meeting. Will you be all right? Torvin will be outside your door." I nodded. He pressed his forehead to mine for a brief, cherished moment, a gesture that had become our silent promise, then left. The guard changed everything. Torvin's silent presence was a constant reminder of the unseen enemy. My movements were noted. My privacy was gone. The sense of being watched, which the notes had instilled, was now institutionalized. But it also had an unintended effect. The court, seeing the king's personal guard assigned to a maid, understood the seriousness of his regard. The open hostility diminished, replaced by a wary, watchful curiosity. The notes stopped. A week passed in tense quiet. Then Gavriel came to me in the archives. He led me to a secluded corner. "We traced the charcoal," he said quietly. "It came from a batch used by the palace artists for sketching. The batch was signed out to a junior scribe named Pell, a quiet man, unremarkable." "Did you question him?" Gavriel's expression was grim. "We found him in his quarters. He had taken his own life. A note claimed he was overcome with shame for spreading malicious gossip. He named no one else. A dead end, a sacrifice. The realization was cold and sickening. Someone with enough power or fear to compel a man to kill himself to protect them. The shadow behind the notes was far more dangerous than I had imagined. I told Alaric that evening in the garden. The news hit him like a physical blow. "This goes deeper than jealousy," he said, his voice tight. "This is someone with reach, with resources, someone who feels genuinely threatened by you." "But why?" I asked, bewildered. "I have no power. I want no throne." "You have my attention," he said simply. "And for some, that is the only power that matters. It means influence. It means a voice in my ear that is not theirs." He looked out to the twilight gathering over the garden. The challenge with Karth united many against an external enemy. Now that enemy is gone, the internal ones are stirring again. You have become a focal point for that unrest. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming in the dusk. "We must be more careful than ever, but we will not hide. We will not let them win by fear." He took my hand, his grip firm. "The festival of the winter moon is in 3 days. It is a public celebration. I want you there, by my side, not hidden away. Let them see that their poison has not worked." It was a bold, defiant move, a declaration of war in the language of court. My stomach clenched with anxiety, but looking at his determined face, I felt my own courage rise to meet his. The invisible girl was gone. The threatened woman would not be cowed. I would stand by his side in the full light of the winter moon and face whatever shadows dared to linger. Chapter 12. The Winter Moon. Hundreds of lanterns, their panes of colored glass depicting lunar phases and mythical beasts, hung from every arch and tree. Long tables groaned under platters of roasted meats, honey-glazed roots, and steaming spiced wine. A huge bonfire roared in the center, its heat pushing back the icy night. Musicians played, and the air thrummed with laughter, conversation, and the underlying powerful energy of so many lichens gathered together. I stood at the entrance to the royal gallery, a raised stone platform overlooking the courtyard. I wore a simple but beautiful gown of deep blue wool, the color of the winter sky just after sunset, a gift from Alaric that had arrived that morning without fanfare. My hair was braided with tiny silver threads that caught the lantern light. Torvin stood a respectful distance behind me. My heart was a drum. This was my first true public appearance since the Hall of Windows, and now I would not be on his arm for a moment, but at his side for the entire evening. He appeared then, descending the steps from the inner keep. He wore ceremonial armor, silvered steel that gleamed like ice, over a tunic of midnight blue. A cloak of black wolf fur settled on his shoulders. He looked every inch the Alpha King, powerful, remote, untouchable. Then his eyes found me, and the king vanished. His stern expression softened into a warmth that was for me alone. He offered his arm, not his hand, a formal, public gesture, but his eyes held a private promise. "Ready?" he asked softly. I took a deep breath, placed my hand on his arm, and felt the solid strength beneath the cool metal. Ready. As we walked out onto the gallery, a hush fell over the courtyard below, followed by a wave of respectful murmurs. Thousands of eyes turned up to us. I kept my chin level, my gaze fixed on the bonfire's heart, drawing strength from the steady pressure of Alaric's arm beneath my hand. The ceremonies began, the lighting of the ancestor candles, the chanting of the old stories by silver-voiced elders, the offering of the first foods to the moon. Alaric performed his duties with a solemn grace, his voice strong as he led the pack in the vows of unity and remembrance. I stood beside him, a silent partner, feeling the weight of tradition and the curious, assessing gaze of his people. When the formalities ended, the celebration resumed with renewed vigor. Alaric led me down into the courtyard, into the heart of the feast. He introduced me to visiting alphas and their families, to venerable elders, to master craftsmen. He did not introduce me as his guest or his friend. He simply said, "This is Kaelen," and let the respect in his tone, the way he stood close to me, speak volumes. I saw Lady Lyra and her father. Alpha Gorin gave me a measured, polite nod, which I returned. Lyra's smile was perfect, but her eyes were cool. Lady Alara was notably absent. As the night wore on, Alaric was pulled into conversations with his commanders. He glanced at me apologetically. "Will you be all right for a moment?" "I'll be by the fire," I said, needing a little space from the intensity of the crowd. I found a slightly quieter spot near the roaring bonfire, its heat a welcome contrast to the night air. I watched the dancers, the families, the warriors laughing together. For a moment, I could almost believe I was part of it. The fear of the notes, the shadowy threat seemed distant in this circle of light and community. "A beautiful night, is it not?" The voice came from beside me. I turned to see a man I didn't recognize. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes. He wore the robes of a scholar or a minor noble. "It is," I agreed politely. "The moon favors us with her light," he said, looking up at the full silver orb hanging in the black sky. "She watches over all her children, even those who come to us from outside the pack." His tone was gentle, but the emphasis was clear. I tensed. "The king has been most welcoming." "Oh, I have no doubt," the man said, his smile never wavering. "Alaric has always had a compassionate heart, even as a boy. It is one of his greatest strengths, and, some might say, a potential vulnerability." He turned his benign gaze fully on me. "Tell me, child, do you understand the concept of a balancing force? In nature, a predator keeps the herd strong by culling the weak. In a kingdom, a king must sometimes make hard choices that seem cruel for the greater good. A gentle influence, while comforting, can unbalance that necessary hardness. It can make a wolf doubt his own teeth." The words were a more sophisticated, more dangerous version of the notes, a warning wrapped in philosophical concern. My blood ran cold. "Are you suggesting the king is unbalanced?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "I am suggesting that every force has a counterforce, and that introducing a new, unknown element into a delicate ecosystem can have unintended consequences, for the element most of all." He nodded towards Alaric, who was deep in conversation with Rylan. "He is the heart of the pack, the target of every ambition, every fear. Those who stand too close to the heart sometimes find themselves pierced by arrows meant for it." He was threatening me plainly, but with such plausible deniability it was chilling. Before I could respond, Alaric was there. He had crossed the space silently, his presence suddenly a wall between me and the older man. His expression was pleasant, but his eyes were chips of glacial ice. "Lord Farron, I did not know you had returned from your estates." The man, Lord Farron, bowed smoothly. "Just today, sire, for the festival. I was just admiring your companion and sharing some thoughts on natural philosophy." "How enlightening," Alaric said, his tone flat. "The feast is this way, Lord Farron. I believe your son was looking for you." It was a dismissal, clear and cold. Lord Farron's smile tightened, but he bowed again and melted into the crowd. Alaric turned to me, his hand coming to rest on the small of my back, a protective, possessive gesture. "What did he say to you?" I repeated the conversation, my voice trembling now that the danger had passed. Alaric's jaw worked. "Farron. He was a close advisor to my father. He has never approved of my rule, thinks I am too lenient, too modern. He believes strength is only shown through ruthlessness." He looked down at me, his eyes blazing with a protective fury. "He will not come near you again. This I swear."
He didn't say anything overtly threatening, I pointed out, though we both knew the truth. The most dangerous threats are wrapped in silk, Alaric growled. He led me away from the fire, toward a quieter terrace overlooking the darkened gardens. The sounds of the festival became a muted hum.
"This is what I feared," he said, his voice low and pained. "My regard is a shield, but it also paints a target on your back. Farron and those like him see you as a symbol of my supposed weakness. They will try to remove you, not to hurt me directly, but to prove a point." "Then what do we do?" I asked, the weight of it all pressing down. He turned to face me, taking both my hands in his. The silver moonlight washed over him, turning him into a figure of myth and stark reality. "We do not retreat. We stand firm. But we must be smarter. You must learn to protect yourself, not just rely on my guards." "Learn? How?" "Rylan will teach you. Basic self-defense, how to spot a threat, how to use your environment." He squeezed my hands. "I will not make you a warrior, Kaelen, but I will give you the tools to be less of a victim, to have your own strength, separate from mine." The idea was both frightening and empowering, to not just be protected, but to be able to protect myself, to have agency, even in this. "All right," I said, nodding. "I'll learn." He pulled me into a gentle embrace, his chin resting on top of my head. We stood like that, under the winter moon, the celebration swirling around us, yet locked in our own bubble of quiet resolve. "My regard is not a weakness. It is the source of my strength. You make me want to be a better king, a better man, and for that, they fear you." I closed my eyes, breathing in his scent of pine and winter night. The invisible, threatened girl was gone. In her place was a woman who was seen, who was challenged, and who was now determined to grow claws of her own. The Festival of Light had revealed the shadows, and we would face them together. Chapter 13. Lessons in Steel. My education began the next morning in a small, private training yard tucked behind the armory. It was hidden from view, a place for royal family or elite guards to train away from prying eyes. The ground was covered in soft sand to cushion falls. Rylan awaited me, his massive arms crossed, his usual bear-like grin replaced by an expression of serious professionalism. Alaric stood nearby, leaning against a post, watching. "Right then, lass, forget everything you think you know about fighting. This ain't about being pretty or fair. It's about going home alive when someone else wants you dead. Your first lesson, your best weapon is your brain. Your second is the element of surprise." He spent the first hour not teaching me to punch, but to see. He had me walk around the yard while he and Alaric watched, then asked me to describe everything I'd noticed: the loose cobblestone near the wall, the bucket of rainwater by the gate, the length of a discarded practice sword leaning against a rack. I'd missed half of it. "A threat don't announce itself with a roar," Rylan grunted. "It's in the shift of a shadow, the too long glance, the hand that's hidden. You learn to see the battlefield before it becomes one." Next came stance and movement, how to stand so you couldn't be easily knocked over, how to fall without breaking bones, how to move lightly and quietly. My body, still not fully recovered from the wagon injuries, protested, but a stubborn pride kept me going. I would not be the weak link. After a week of these fundamentals, Rylan introduced the first practical techniques. "You're small," he said, not unkindly. "You'll never overpower a lichen, not even in human form, so you don't try. You use their strength against them. You target what's weak." He showed me pressure points: the eyes, the throat, the groin, the knee. He taught me simple, brutal strikes using the heel of my palm, my elbow, my knee. Forget slapping. You drive through the target. Imagine your hand going out the back of their head.
He taught me to break holds, to twist out of grabs. He had me practice on him, and though he was holding back immensely, the sheer solidity of him was daunting. But I learned, slowly, painfully. Alaric watched every session, silent but intensely present. Sometimes, when Rylan was explaining a finer point of leverage, Alaric would step in and demonstrate with a fluid, terrifying efficiency that showed the deadly warrior beneath the king. His touch when he adjusted my stance or guided my arm was clinical, but it still sent sparks over my skin. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling session where I'd finally managed to break Rylan's practice hold and scramble away, I collapsed on a bench, gasping for air. Alaric brought me a cup of water. "You're doing well," he said, sitting beside me. "Better than I expected." "I feel clumsy, slow," I panted. "You are learning a new language with your body. It takes time, but you have the most important quality already, the will to survive. Rylan can teach technique. I cannot teach that fire." I looked at my hands, red and scraped. "Do you really think I'll ever need this, to use it?" His expression sobered. "I hope with everything in me that you never do, but hope is not a strategy. Being prepared, that is a form of peace. Knowing you have options, that you are not helpless, it changes how you walk through the world." He was right. Even these basic lessons were changing me. I walked through the Citadel corridors now, not just seeing tapestries and faces, but noting alcoves, assessing the people who passed me, their gait, their focus. I carried myself differently, not with aggression, but with awareness. The lessons also became a strange new kind of intimacy between Alaric and me. We had our quiet talks in the garden, our shared moments over books, but here, in the gritty reality of the training yard, we were connected in a different way, united in the practical goal of my safety. It was a partnership, a shared project that deepened our bond in a way mere words could not. One evening, after a lesson, Alaric didn't immediately return to his duties. He walked with me back towards the staff quarters, a rare indulgence. "The Spring Equinox Council is in a month," he said as we walked. "The leaders of all the major and minor pacts within the Dominion will gather here. It is a time of renewal, of settling disputes, of planning for the year ahead." A knot formed in my stomach, a gathering of all the most powerful lichens in the land. "I imagine Lord Farron will be there." "He will, as will many others who are curious about you." He stopped, turning to face me in the dim corridor. "I want you there, Kaelen, not hidden away. I want you to see the whole of what I'm responsible for, the good and the difficult, and I want them to see you, not as a threat or symbol, but as you are." It was a huge step, an official political event. "I don't know the protocols. I'll make a mistake." "You will learn," he said, echoing my words from the training yard, "and I will be there, not as your tutor, but as your—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. "Friend," I supplied softly. "Friend," he agreed, his eyes warm, "and perhaps one day more, but only when you are ready, only when you choose it." The promise in his words, the patience, was a gift more precious than any public honor. He was offering me a future, but on my terms, at my pace. As I lay in bed that night, my muscles aching, my mind whirled with the Equinox Council, with pressure points and political maneuvers, with the memory of his steady gaze in the torchlight. I was no longer the girl from the wagon, or the invisible maid, or even just the king's curious companion. I was becoming Kaelen, who was learning to stand her ground, who was seen by a king, who was slowly and surely finding a place in a world she had never dreamed belonged to her. And for the first time, the future didn't just feel like something to be endured, it felt like something to be met, head on.
Chapter 14: The Equinox Council. The White Citadel transformed in the week leading up to the Spring Equinox Council. It became a living map of the Terran Dominion. Banners of every hue and crest snapped in the mountain wind, the silver wolf on gray of the main branch, the running stag of the eastern vale, the crossed axes of the ironwood pack, the glacier flower of the northern reaches. The air buzzed with a dozen different accents, the smells of foreign spices, and the subtle, shifting scent signatures of powerful alphas and their retinues. My lessons with Rylan intensified, but now included instruction from a patient, exasperated Maris on formal etiquette, and from a stern Master Innes on the hierarchy of the packs and the deadly faux pas to avoid. I felt like a student cramming for the most important test of my life. The day of the opening ceremony arrived. I stood in my chamber, dressed in another of Alaric's gifts, a gown of forest green, the color of new growth, simple in cut but exquisitely made. Tessa fussed with my hair, weaving it into an intricate braid that felt alien on my head. "You look like a lady of the court," she declared, stepping back. I didn't feel like one. I felt like an imposter about to be exposed on the grandest stage imaginable. Torvin escorted me to the Gallery of the Ancestors, a vast hall whose walls were lined with stone effigies of past kings and queens. It was already filled. Hundreds of lichens, the most powerful in the land, stood in ordered groups. The air vibrated with suppressed energy, with old rivalries and new alliances being silently assessed. Alaric stood on a low dais at the far end, flanked by Nathaniel and the eldest members of his council. He wore the formal silver and obsidian armor of the Alpha presiding, a ceremonial circlet of white gold on his brow. He looked like the embodiment of sovereign power, utterly remote. Then his eyes scanned the crowd and found me. The barest hint of a smile touched his lips, a tiny crack in the royal facade, just for me. It was enough. I took a steadying breath and moved to my assigned place, not among the nobility on the main floor, but in a small raised alcove to the side of the dais, a place of observation, of acknowledged presence without presumption. It was a carefully chosen compromise, shielding me from the most intense scrutiny while making my status clear. The ceremony began. Hours of formal greetings, the presenting of gifts, the recitation of pack lineages and oath renewals. It was a mesmerizing display of ritual and power. I watched Alaric navigate it all with a calm, effortless authority, his voice firm as he greeted each alpha by name, acknowledged their grievances, confirmed their rights. He was in his element, the center of this complex, living web. During a recess, as people mingled in an adjoining hall, I ventured down from my alcove. I kept to the edges, observing. I saw Lord Farron deep in conversation with Alpha Gorin of the Silver Mane. Both men glanced my way, their expressions unreadable. Lady Lyra was surrounded by a group of younger nobles, laughing brightly, but her eyes too flicked toward me with cool assessment. "So you are the human who has captured our king's attention." The voice was female, warm and curious. I turned to see an older woman, her dark hair streaked with elegant silver, her eyes a warm brown. She wore the simple, practical garb of a hunter, but the emerald clasp holding her cloak was of obvious value. "I am Kaelen," I said, offering a slight bow, unsure of her rank. "I am Alara," she said, and my heart stuttered until she smiled. "Not that Alara. I am Alpha of the Whispering Woods Pack, to the south. No relation to the spiteful little viper from the north." Her smile was genuine, her eyes crinkling. "I knew Alaric's mother. She was a wise woman. She would have liked you." The unexpected kindness caught me off guard. "Why do you say that?" "Because you watch. You listen. You do not preen or posture. You have the stillness of the deep woods.
It is a rare quality in these halls of noise. She leaned closer. And you make him less lonely. For that, you have the gratitude of those of us who remember the boy he was before the crown crushed his shoulders. Before I could respond, a commotion arose near the dais. A young alpha from a western border pack was speaking, his voice rising in anger. And yet, the rogue infestations continue, not the large bands, but small, vicious raids. They strike and vanish like ghosts. My people are afraid to tend their fields. Where is the protection the central pack promises? Alaric listened, his expression neutral. Your people's fear is my failure, he said, his voice carrying. I hear it. More warriors will be dispatched to the western marches within the week. He paused, his gaze sweeping the discontented faces. But your own methods, Alpha Bren. The law of the first accords is clear. Justice is unified. We are not a collection of squabbling tribes. We are a dominion.
If you take vengeance into your own hands and ignite a blood feud with a rogue remnant, you risk dragging us all into a war we have just ended. Is your immediate satisfaction worth that? The logic was irrefutable. Alpha Bren flushed, but subsided, his anger banked by the king's calm authority. Alaric had acknowledged the problem, offered a solution, and reasserted the unifying law, all without raising his voice. It was a masterful display of leadership. Later that night, after the formal banquet, Alaric found me on a balcony overlooking the moonlit mountains. He had shed his ceremonial armor and looked weary. You handled Alpha Bren perfectly, I said. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. For now, the embers are still there. If I cannot stamp them out completely, the discontent will grow. He looked at me. You saw it all. The posturing, the fears, the delicate balance. This is the reality. Not just grand halls and titles, but this constant, exhausting navigation of ego and need. It's what you were born to do, I said softly. You were magnificent. He turned to me, his eyes searching my face in the silver light. He reached out, tucking a wind-blown hair behind my ear. His touch lingered. Thank you for being here today, for not hiding. Where else would I be? The answer came without thought, simple and true. His expression softened into something unbearably tender. He leaned closer, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought he might finally bridge the last careful distance between us. But he stopped, his breath a warm cloud in the cold air, his forehead nearly touching mine. The restraint was a more powerful declaration than any kiss could have been. Soon, he whispered, a promise and a question. Soon, I echoed, the word a vow. We stood like that as the moon traced its path across the star-strewn sky, two people anchored together in the silent understanding that whatever challenges came, from rogue embers or courtly vipers, from border disputes or whispered threats, we would face them not as king and maid, but as Alaric and Kaelen, partners in all things. Chapter 15. From Survivor to Sovereign. Spring arrived in the mountains not with a gentle thaw, but with the violent, glorious melt of 100 ice-locked streams. The white citadel echoed with the sound of rushing water, and the Queen's garden began to show hesitant signs of life. Tight furled buds on the roses, the first brave spears of green breaking through the mulch. Life settled into a new, purposeful rhythm. The Equinox Council concluded with agreements forged and tensions, if not resolved, at least managed. The additional warriors were dispatched to the western borders. The whispers about me in the court, while never fully ceasing, evolved from scandalized speculation into an accepted, if still debated, fact. My training with Rylan continued, shifting from pure defense to incorporating simple weapons, a short, weighted rod he called a persuader, and a slim dagger for close work.
I would never be a match for a lichen warrior, but I could now move with a confidence that made potential threats think twice. The fearful, hunted feeling left by the poisoned notes receded, replaced by a wary awareness. Alaric and I found our balance. Our afternoons in the garden were now often spent in comfortable silence, him reviewing reports, me reading, the quiet companionship itself a conversation. We spoke of the kingdom's future, of his hopes for a lasting peace with the Western rogues, now settling under the Elder Council's watch, of my ideas for expanding the public archives. He listened to my thoughts with a seriousness that never failed to astonish me. One such afternoon, as the sun warmed the stone of the bench, he set aside a scroll and looked at me, his expression unusually solemn. "Kaelen, there is something I must ask you." My heart gave a familiar, nervous flutter. "Anything." "The midsummer gathering is in 3 months' time. It is less formal than the Equinox Council, but significant. It is when alliances are often strengthened, through marriage." The world seemed to still. The birdsong, the murmur of the fountain, everything faded. He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "I have had offers, politically advantageous ones, from Alpha Goran for his daughter Lyra, from others." He took a deep breath. "I have refused them all." "Why?" The word was a whisper. "Because my heart, my loyalty, my future, they are not mine to barter." His silver-gold eyes held mine, fierce and vulnerable. "They already belong to someone, to the woman who looked at a king and saw a lonely man, to the survivor who taught a warrior about mercy, to my dearest friend." Tears blurred my vision. "Alaric," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "I am asking, not as your king, but as the man who loves you. Will you stand by my side, not just in a garden or a library, but before all the Dominion? Will you let me build a life with you? Will you be my Luna?" Luna, the mate of the Alpha, his equal in rule, in spirit. It was an honor, a responsibility, a destiny I had never dared to imagine for myself. All my fears rose up, the whispers, the threats, my own feelings of inadequacy, the ghost of the Wagon girls who would never have this chance. But looking into his eyes, seeing the love and the absolute certainty there, those fears melted like the last of the winter snow. He wasn't offering to save me, he was asking me to stand with him, to be his partner in the truest sense. He saw not a broken thing to fix, but a whole person to share his burdens and his joys.